floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for all the hard work you've done organizing this, Julian, in London, and people asking their questions. Very impressive. A few weeks ago, the Guardian newspaper in London published a major article with the following headlines: "Be ashamed. Salmon criticized over Russian TV link. RT launches show despite propaganda concerns." The former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmon, has a new discussion show on RT, the television channel which used to be known as Russia Today. What's more, Salmon scooped the entire British media with an interview with the deposed Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont. Why should Salmon be ashamed? What exactly are the Guardian's propaganda concerns? The implication of the Guardian article was that RT was a sinister force, that Alex Salmon had no right to his show, and that a mildly dissenting view of the world had no place in the media. Consider the irony. Here was the Guardian's media editor, Graham Ruddick, parroting disinformation, propaganda, and smear, along with the suspicions, quote unquote, of Western security services. James Clapper, the former head of America's National Intelligence Agency, was quoted, "RT," said Clapper, "was a mouthpiece of Russian government propaganda." What the Guardian didn't tell us was that Clapper was the notorious liar who denied under oath to the US Congress that the NSA collected information on millions of Americans and millions of the rest of us, a fact that Edward Snowden revealed. Clapper later resigned, narrowly escaping charges of perjury. The Guardian also quoted that bastion of free speech, the British Foreign Office. The US Department of Justice was cited, even though no crime had been committed. The two demon words, Kremlin and Putin, adorn Mr. Ruddick's drivel. Such is the state of journalism, mainstream journalism, in 2017. What on earth is going on? If RT is the Kremlin's soft power, as the Guardian suggested, one wonders what the BBC is, with its long documented history of suppression, of doing the bidding of British governments, and of serving Western power. During the Irish War, the BBC banned, doctored, or delayed more than 50 major TV programmes. Has RT performed such a censorial role? And there is the notoriety of the BBC's reporting of Iraq, but I shall come to that shortly. I also appear on RT from time to time. So do people of widely varying political views, from right to left. There's even a scattering of independent critical thinking, a quality now obsolete in the mainstream media. Unlike its mainstream competitors, there is no warmongering. How threatening RT's growing popularity must be. Imagine its brainwashed audience, people like myself, who now regard much of corporate news, from which people like myself have come, as unwatchable and unreadable. The term fake news was not invented by Donald Trump. Neither was it invented by social media. It was contrived, and it has been reinforced by the liberal media in the United States and carried by the liberal media in the UK and in Europe. The aim clearly has been to deflect a growing public awareness of the media's long-time role as disseminators of state and vested interest propaganda, the very thing RT is accused of without evidence. So much is devoid of evidence these days, yet evidence is the root of real journalism. But who needs evidence when you're running a witch hunt or a campaign of rumours and hearsay, when you're shouting j'accuse at people? Who needs the presumption of innocence? Who needs the right of reply, the demands of proof and natural justice? Who needs the rights that people have died fighting for since the Magna Carta? What matters, it seems, is indignation. The Russians did it. Putin did it. Kevin Spacey is guilty. The media has become a lynch mob. This is not fake news. This is fake journalism. 100 years ago, at the height of the imperial slaughter known as the First World War, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, David Lloyd George, shared a secret with the editor of the Manchester Guardian, which became The Guardian, C.P. Scott. If the people really knew the truth, he said, the war would be stopped tomorrow, but they don't know and they can't know, unquote. That principle of censorship by omission has ruled the mainstream media ever since. The BBC was founded on it, with Lord John Reith, its founder, secretly writing propaganda for the Tory government during a general strike. In 1945, the celebrated New York Times correspondent, W.H. Lawrence, set the post-war standard for collusion by lying about the true effects of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. His front-page story was headlined, "No radioactivity in Hiroshima ruin," unquote. It was fake news. 8 years later, the same distinguished newspaper ran a similar front-page story headline, "How Communists Took Control of Guatemala." It was fake news. The reporter was Sidney Grusin. He claimed that the Russians and local communists had taken control of the small Latin American state. Not only was this false, as the archives have long since shown, but the opposite was true. The United States, which had exploitative interests in Guatemala, had violently overthrown that country's first democratically elected reformist government. The president of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, was stripped naked at the airport as he was thrown out of his own country. Today, this is known in Guatemala as the Great Crime. It was a crime that depended on the collusion of the media, of journalism. In 2009, researchers at the University of the West of England published a study that examined BBC reporting of Venezuela over more than a decade. Out of 304 BBC reports, only three mentioned any of the positive policies introduced by the democratically elected government of Hugo Chavez. There was almost nothing on Venezuela's historic initiatives, nothing on human rights legislation, nothing on food programs, healthcare initiatives, poverty reduction. The greatest literacy program in history received only passing reference. An unprecedented record of democratic elections was suppressed as if to show that Chavez somehow lacked electoral support. One BBC report compared him to Hitler. Venezuela is getting the treatment again. J'accuse. Venezuela has problems. The price of oil has collapsed. Chavez is dead, and the BBC, The Guardian, The Times, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and the rest are lined up like gravediggers to bury that flawed democracy that inspired millions of the world's poorest people and gave them hope. There are strict rules or designations imposed by the purveyors of real fake news, if that isn't a contradiction. To paraphrase the late Ed Herman, some news is worthy, other news is unworthy. Some victims are worthy, others are unworthy. In the 1990s, Western public opinion was groomed by the media for an illegal assault on Yugoslavia, a multi-ethnic, semi-socialist federation independent of the United States and Europe, both of which wanted to exploit it, especially Germany. The Serbs were told that if they didn't agree to a NATO occupation and to convert their economy to the so-called free market, their country would be bombed. That was in an appendix. It wasn't reported throughout the West, appendix to a so-called peace agreement at the so-called Rambouillet peace talks. It was the kind of offer the mafia make. None of it was news. The destruction of Yugoslavia was a worthy cause. In the spring of 1999, the US Defense Secretary, William Cohen, claimed that the government in Belgrade had murdered 100,000 men from Kosovo. That was fake. David Sheffer, the US ambassador at large for war crimes, increased this figure to, and I quote, 225,000 ethnic Albanian men aged between 14 and 59. That was fake too. The British media took its cue from Tony Blair, who invoked the memory of the Holocaust and compared the people of Kosovo with the Jews under the Nazis. Flight from genocide, said the Daily Mail, echoes of the Holocaust, chorused the Sun and the Mirror. NATO bombers flew at high altitudes. They were mainly British and American aircraft, but Norwegian aircraft took part as well on this assault on another European country. Depleted uranium and cluster bombs were dropped on factories, bridges, schools, churches. At least 500 people were killed. How shameful it was. But surely mass graves in Kosovo would provide Britain, America, Norway with justification. International forensic teams swarmed over Kosovo. The FBI flew in to investigate what the media called the largest crime scene in the FBI's forensic history. The FBI found not a single mass grave and went home. The Spanish forensic team also returned home, with its leader complaining angrily that he and his colleagues had become part of, and I quote, a semantic pirouette by the war propaganda machines because we did not find one, not one, mass grave. The suffering of the people of Iraq were also designated an unworthy cause. During the 1990s, countless Iraqi men, women, and children died and suffered as a result of a medievalist blockade imposed by the United States, by the United Nations, in reality, by the United States and Britain. I saw the evidence and I filmed it. A true Holocaust had begun, including an epidemic of cancers caused by the use of depleted uranium in the first Gulf War. Iraqi